to yield to an outstanding member of our committee, John Delaney, from the great state of Maryland.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for how many minutes?
5 minutes.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my good friend and the gentlelady from New York for yielding me time to talk about my colleagues, the Republicans' budget, which is something I oppose. And I oppose it on a number of policy reasons, but I thought I would spend my time today talking about what I view as a more fundamental analytical flaw in the budget, and that relates to the overall goal of the budget, because if you have the wrong goal, you often make a series of bad decisions to support that goal. So I think it's important that we talk about what the goal of the budget and what the goal of the budget should be. The goal of the Republican budget is to have zero deficits within 10 years. And in my opinion, that's the goal because it sounds good. We've all heard the line that we should not spend more money than we take in. That sounds really good, but it ignores, to many extents, the basic math of budgets. It's also an unrealistic goal, and it's also an unnecessary goal. And as a result of pursuing an unrealistic and unnecessary goal, a series of very bad decisions are embedded in the budget, which is why I want to talk about the goal. It's an unrealistic goal when you look at the condition of the federal budget at this moment in time. After several decades of this Congress and several administrations ignoring in many ways the fiscal responsibility of this great country and allowing our debt to become such a high percentage of our economy, we've put ourselves in a position where we've had very significant deficits, and the debt levels are such that we have very limited financial flexibility as a country, and if interest rates were to go up, it would increasingly consume a very large percentage of our budget. That's the problem, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we're entering a phase where the demographic trends in the country and the aging on a relative basis of the population are putting tremendous pressure on the resources of the federal government. So this is a very, very challenging time to take a budget that has had very significant deficits and try to bring them to zero within 10 years. That's why it's unrealistic. It's also unnecessary because the most important metric in the financial health of the United States of America is our debt as a percentage of our economy. And if we want to lower our debt as a percentage of our economy, what we have to do is have a budget where our deficits, expressed as a percentage of our economy, are consistently lower than economic growth. So we should be targeting deficits of 1 to 2%, with a view that the minimum baseline economic growth of this country will be 2 to 3%, and definitionally, over time, that will take the debt of the country as a percentage of the country down. It will give us more financial flexibility in the future and position us so that when interest rates rise, which they will, it'll consume a much smaller percentage of our budget. That should be the goal. But because we have this unrealistic and unnecessary goal of getting deficits to zero within 10 years, my Republican colleagues are forced to overcorrect in the budget to achieve that goal. There are two fundamental ways to overcorrect in a budget. You either raise taxes very high to get revenues to get it to zero, or you cut investments very significantly. Now, my Republican colleagues don't choose to raise taxes. In fact, what they choose to do is to cut taxes, which makes an already unrealistic goal more unrealistic. So the only thing that's left to bring this budget to zero within 10 years is massive, massive reductions in the investments we're making in our future and in our nation, which to me is a very odd decision in light of the facts that are in front of us. And the facts that are in front of us are very clear. We're in a global and very competitive economy, and we haven't made the investments, particularly in things like infrastructure, to position this country to compete as successfully as it should in a world that's increasingly interconnected. Also, we have to make investments in our children, Mr. Speaker. We're in a knowledge-based economy, and to make sure that our kids are capable of being employed and having a rising standard of living across their lives, we have to invest in their future. So to achieve this unrealistic goal, my Republican colleagues make very significant cuts to these critical investments, which you could argue it has never been more important to do that. In fact, they bring many of these levels down to half of what they've been historically, again, and importantly, expressed as a percentage of our economy, because it's irrelevant to talk about absolute numbers. The only numbers that should be talked about is the budget in terms of a percentage of our economy. And that's why I view this budget as so troubling and misguided. And, Mr. Speaker, I spent my whole career prior to coming to Congress running publicly traded companies that I started. And I used to observe other managers who are running publicly traded companies from time to time make really bad decisions about what to do with their business. And those bad decisions were often based on a fundamental premise that they would pander to the market and put forth unrealistic. Can I have another 30 seconds or 1 minute?
Another 10 seconds. I have a lot of speakers.
Put forth unrealistic expectations. They would make bad decisions to achieve those expectations, and the story would end badly. That's what we have here. We have unrealistic expectations, a series of bad decisions, and if this were to be followed, a bad outcome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman